It is so rare for me to review a piece of technology that has some genuinely mind-blowing feature, but this is one of those. The CAT S62 Pro is a rugged smartphone with one incredible superpower. It has a built-in FLIR imaging sensor, or forward-looking infrared, which detects infrared radiation, or to you and me, heat, temperature. Now, this sort of technology is typically reserved for military and really professional application, but the FLIR company has democratized this technology and made it accessible and affordable to everyone, including an embeddable version, which is what you find here. So I'm going to start this review of the CAT S62 Pro phone by talking about the specs of the FLIR camera, because that is the standout feature of this phone. And it is ludicrously good fun and just really interesting, I think. So this apparently has the latest Lepton 3.5 FLIR sensor in it, which has 4 times the number of detection pixels over the previous generation. And it runs at a resolution of 160 by 120, which doesn't sound like much, but actually you don't need super high resolution for the thermal sensors. It's not quite the same as a photograph. Now, you can actually buy the sensor alone for around $200 if you had the skill to integrate that into another camera system of some sort. But if you want to buy the equivalent sort of sensor in a ready-made package, then you'd be looking at the FLIR C5, which costs around $800. So having a sensor with that level of detail built into a smartphone is actually fantastic value, I think, in a $600 package. Now, by default, the FLIR app shows you a sort of mixed reality mode with the outline of real-world objects, and it dynamically changes the scale according to the range of temperatures that it's seeing. However, you can lock that if you don't want it to do that, if you want to manually adjust the range. You can add a single or multiple points to measure, and that shows you an actual temperature on the screen. You can record the output, which is what you're seeing now. And there's some other mixed reality modes you can tweak should you want more or less of the real world view in there, as well as being able to change the color palette away from the default iron. Now, that said, I mostly used it with the default mode, which felt like the most useful to me. So, what exactly can you do with a thermal sensor on a phone? Well, mostly I used it for science. We took a walk around the garden at night and found out a lot about the natural environment. What you're seeing here is 4 fresh bags of compost that's made from green waste. You can see that it was still very much actively composting. It kind of looks like a lava flow with the heat just under the surface. And as we dug away the top layer, it was incredibly warm. Sure, you can feel this even in the daytime, but to visualize it in this way was fascinating. We also had a look at our hot bin, a home composter, which, to be honest, I've never really believed their claims that it gets up to around 60 degrees Celsius. But using the temperature readout of this, we could see it was very close to that, even on a cold April night. We also observed how much heat the rocks retain overnight. We have some large rock gabion walls on our hillside. We could even see... That cockerel's really annoying. We could even see how full an opaque water butt was by the heat that the water retains. I mean, it's something you learn, that rock and water retains heat, but you don't really know that until you turn on this layer of the world that's usually hidden. We found it fascinating, just something as simple as walking on a carpet or sitting on a sofa, that you would transfer such a noticeable amount of heat that you could literally see footsteps or a body image after you've walked on it or moved across something. It kind of feels like looking into the past. I think if you wanted to track, say, an animal outdoors, this would be immensely useful. I also realized we could trace hot water pipes and metal beams behind the drywall in the kitchen, because of course they're either hotter or naturally retain heat for longer. Looking at my office and everything that was plugged in there was frankly terrifying, but it was also interesting to see on our nanoleaf light panels that you could see the connections internally where they were, even though it's such a small temperature difference. It also seemed to identify quite clearly some damp problems we have with our walls. For homeowners trying to deal with insulation issues and identify cold spots, I think this could be really quite useful. So overall, it's just a fascinating feature to have, even for someone who's not using it in a professional capacity like me. All right, with that out of the way, let's talk about the rest of the Cat 62 Pro phone here. In terms of overall size, the screen is 5.7-inch TFT LCD with Gorilla Glass 6. And it eschews the whole notch thing, just cutting the screen down and leaving the notch black. It's not a curved display or side to side. There's about a 2mm frame on the left and right and 10mm on the top and bottom, giving an overall screen to body ratio of 69%, which is pretty low in comparison to most flagships. But on the other hand, I've not had many problems with visibility. It feels bright enough and the colors are fair. Though, like most devices, visibility in direct sunlight is tricky. The resolution is 1280 by 2160, so a little bit higher than HD, but it's not Retina or anything like that. I don't think the screen will be a complaint, but nor is it a particular aspect of the phone that I would labor over and tell you how great it is. It's quite a thick phone, at around 12-13mm for most of the body, with an additional millimetre or so here for the camera and FLIR sensor which protrudes. In terms of design and style, I really quite like it. There's a nice textured area on the back which acts as a grip. It feels quite industrial. It has that cat branding embossed, and there's a fingerprint sensor in the middle, which for me worked very reliably. A multifunction orange button can be found on the left-hand side with volume and power on the right and an exposed USB-C port on the base. There's no headphone jack, but there is a dual SIM tray and you can place a micro SD card into one of those if you like. It's got a thick metal frame which contributes to the overall durability and to the weight at just under 250 grams. The overall industrial and brushed metal style really appeals to me, and it just feels really well built and solid. It feels great in your hand, though I just tend to like bulky phones anyway. With a 3-year-old Snapdragon 660 and Adreno 512 graphics chip with 6 GB of RAM, performance in the Cat S62 Pro is best described as mediocre. Geekbench 5 gave it a single-core CPU score of 294 and multi-core 1403, along with a GPU Compute OpenCL score of 574. 3D Mark Wildlife ranked it as more powerful than a mere 9% of phones tested this quarter, and in the bottom 3% overall, with an average of 2 frames per second. So it's definitely not a top performer by any metrics. I was unable to run the 3D Mark stress test, in fact, but I did try playing Call of Duty, and that was basically playable, but not exactly smooth. Clearly, this isn't a gaming phone, but does it really matter? In general use, the interface running a stock Android 10 can at times feel a little bit sluggish. There's an almost imperceptible latency to a lot of things. Even with my DNS ad blocker running while browsing in Chrome, things felt a bit slow. I'm not sure if this will even come out on the video. Like I say, it was almost imperceptible. Loading times are quite slow too, generally, and this is probably due to its use of eMMC internal memory. Updates do seem to be timely though, typically security updates every 3 months. The latest at the time of testing is from April the 1st, so at least you know it's going to be secure. As for battery life, from the 4000 mAh battery, I managed to get a full day and then some from the Cat S62 Pro. Under typical use, including listening to the radio for a few hours, streaming over 3G, browsing Reddit, running some performance tests, that sort of thing. Using the FLIR camera sensor does take a chunk of battery though. Frustratingly, the Cat S62 Pro doesn't have wireless Qi charging, but I suspect that has something to do with interfering with the FLIR sensor circuitry, because otherwise a Qi charging receiver is basically a metal coil. It's a absolutely minimal cost, so it doesn't make sense to not integrate one, especially on a rugged device where you don't really want the ports exposed all the time. There's only a single camera sensor on the S62 Pro, other than the FLIR feature, of course. It's a 12 megapixel f1.8, and in good light, you can get some good photos, though low light performance is as bad as can be expected from a mid-range smartphone. Ultimately, the Cat S62 Pro is not a top-tier phone, despite somewhat top-tier pricing. It doesn't set out to be, of course. It's unashamedly functional in most aspects, with a mediocre battery life thanks to a power-inefficient screen, unimpressive performance, the fact that it only has a single camera, and the complete lack of wireless Qi charging. That said, I've been using it as a main phone for a week or so, and most of what I do with my phone hasn't really suffered. Reddit, Google Discovery, Gmail, Slack, it's all fine. Phone processors are pretty advanced at this point anyway, and even something with mediocre performance numbers is not really going to feel all that bad in use. It just looks bad on paper. At $600 though, a big chunk of the price does come from having that FLIR sensor built in. That is the main feature. And you'd be insane to buy this phone if that's not something you plan on making use of. There are far better performing phones at this price point that do not have a thermal sensor in them. But I was genuinely blown away by just how interesting the FLIR feature was and how useful it can be in daily life. It's been fascinating to learn about the world around us and the hidden thermal activity. It feels genuinely like you have a bit of a superpower. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope I've told you what you need to know about the Cat S62 Pro and whether it's the rugged smartphone for you. Please hit like if you found this helpful, and do consider subscribing to the channel for more daily tech news, gadget reviews, giveaways and more from all of us at MUO or makeuseof.com. Until next time. Oh, there you go, little cutie, aren't you? Smile. Yeah. Yeah, I know this phone's rugged, but I don't think it'll take you eating it. Will it?